Quick disclaimer, this video is taking an eternity to make. It's on track to become like 3 to 4 to 5 hours long, and I've kept you guys waiting long enough, so I've elected to just bite the bullet and split it up into parts again. And once the full thing is complete, I'll stitch it back together into the mega video I wanted to make. The original Final Fantasy VII House videos I made on this channel are going to also be unlisted with the release of this first part, but they are still viewable through the Internet Interest playlist on my channel, for archival purposes. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for watching. Oh man, here we go again. Final Fantasy VII released for the PlayStation 1 in 1997 and would go on to be considered by many the greatest game of all time. The Final Fantasy series is a huge spanning franchise of JRPGs themed around, well, fantasy stuff. Lots of magic, monsters, potions, swords, typical RPG flair. The games aren't exactly sequels to each other, not in the way most people would think at least. I mean, okay, they're sequels, but they have names like Final Fantasy X-2. It's really more of an anthology series. There are series traditions and recurring motifs, but almost every game has its own universe. For example, while Final Fantasy III has a traditional medieval fantasy setting, Final Fantasy VIII features hyper-futuristic cities. An easy way to distinguish them is to think of each game's Roman numeral as a designator. This series is so vast that each numbered entry is practically its own sub-series, and this is felt the most with Final Fantasy VII. VII was the introduction to RPGs for the majority of the Western gaming audience. As a result of its revolutionary impact on the gaming zeitgeist, it has since endured as the most popular Final Fantasy title. Something which Squaresoft, Final Fantasy's development studio, saw as a golden opportunity. The overwhelming success of the game spawned an entire multimedia franchise with novels, a canon mobile game, an animated film sequel thing, a prequel game, a goddamn third-person shooter spin-off, and most recently, a whole big-budget remake series. It's the video game equivalent of the fucking Matrix. Some people just can't move past FF7. The characters, world, story, themes, subtly hinted at background lore. People were very captivated by it all. Not to knock down any of the other games, the entire series is still going strong for a reason, and everyone has their favorite, but for a long time, the internet was talking about how 7 was not only the best FF game, but the best game of all time. Even the back of the damn jewel case says, quite possibly the greatest game ever made. No matter what your personal take is, it cannot be understated how wide of a reach this game has. The influence of the game runs deep, and its fandom thrives. Sure, people love to draw fan art and cosplay, yeah, typical fare. Some love to write long fanfictions about minor characters, yeah, it comes with the territory. Others even made fan shrines on old websites and had long discussions about shipping. It may seem a bit odd to the everyman, but this is all typical fandom behavior. But what if I told you that this game inspired a cult? No, not a cult following. I mean an honest-to-God, albeit small-scale cult with followers of a normal person claiming to be magic and having incredible powers, limiting food, sleep, and contact with the outside world, and shunning all who oppose the will of their leader. It just so happens that this cult believes themselves to be reincarnations of Final Fantasy VII characters. I present to you the story of the Final Fantasy VII House.
No, not you! Go away!
Howdy, I'm Sprited, and welcome to Internet Interest. Some of my longtime viewers might be getting some deja vu. I have covered part of this tale, but during the long production of the follow-up video, a lot has changed, a ton of new stuff was made public, and a lot of what I talked about just became outdated. This here is what I aim to be the most comprehensive, all that we know so far retelling of the infamous Final Fantasy VII House story. A remake of sorts. A rebirth, even. But what even is the Final Fantasy VII House? It's the long, complicated tale of a small group of people who believe themselves to be reincarnations of various fictional characters, most famously the cast of the 1997 video game Final Fantasy VII. At the heart of it all, the ringleader, so to say, is a mysterious woman by the name of Jennifer Cornet. Various people spanning decades now have had run-ins, and many have lived with Jen, and have since come forward sharing their stories. It's a huge, tangled, confusing, funny, tragic, upsetting web to sift through, but thanks to the community of fellow deep divers, I hope to provide the story as cohesively as possible. A huge shout out has to go to the Human Exception Podcast, the r/Tattlecrime Discord server, and the r/JenniferCornetFFHouse subreddit. Without these three pillars, this video could never happen, and I absolutely cannot take any credit for the fantastic work that this community has put into documenting as much of this story as possible. I'm simply here to put the pieces together. This is the story of the Final Fantasy VII House. One day, a LiveJournal user, I just realized most people actually don't know what LiveJournal is. It's basically a site where every user can run their own blog. It's kind of like a proto-Tumblr, but with no images. Everyone's posts are mostly framed as like diary or journal entries, just ones that you share with others. It was more popular back then, but anyway. Okay, so a guy in LiveJournal, Mitru Ko, posts a journal about, quote, internet crazies gone bad. Much like Twitter nowadays, a viral post on LiveJournal always inspired plenty of other users to play along, to tell similar stories, and to give their takes and whatnot. The date is April 18th, 2005. User GenkiCrack, inspired by this journal entry, decides to share his own story, one that shook him to the core just 3 years prior. He relayed a tale that would shock readers, exploding all across the internet and remaining in infamy even to this day. It begins...
This all happened a while ago, like checking old journal dates when it was 2002. I was fucking stupid then, as you'll see. I should have seen obvious signs and didn't. People have noted that I was stupid. They are smart and they're right. The reason this is up here is so other people will read it and not be as stupid as I was.
GenkiCrack, or as I will call him, Icarus, began attending university in 2001. His drinking ramped up around this time, but this period also introduced him to plenty of video games. In particular, he really enjoyed Final Fantasy VII, enough that he began engaging in the online fandom for the game. He ran a fairly popular web shrine dedicated to the characters Cloud and Zack. Cloud is the game's main protagonist, but Zack was a more minor character, being very important to the plot, but most of his story stuff happens off-screen in the original game. Incompletely missable cutscenes, too. This was years before he ended up getting his own spin-off game, so he was never really popular enough to have a whole lot of websites for him, and Icarus' site got a bunch of eyes on him in the fandom because of that. Being new to this wave of attention, he decides to put his name on the site so anyone can message him whenever. Clearly this proved to be a great idea when he gets into a conversation with a peculiar fellow by the name of Jack. Jack offers Icarus a link exchange, and Icarus is like, yeah, whatever. Jack's site, of course, would be hojo.org. Hojo.org was a similar web shrine, this time dedicated to another FF7 character, the mad scientist Hojo. Hojo himself doesn't have a lot of screen time in the game either, but he's by no means a minor character. Just like Zack, he's pivotal to the plot, just in the background. To make it quick, in the story of FF7, there was an ancient civilization of magical people called the Cetra. They were wiped out 2,000 years ago by an alien evil called Jenova. Hojo, in the present, did all sorts of experiments with Jenova's cells, like injecting it into people, and even creating a child born of Jenova cells, being Sephiroth, the game's main villain. Hojo is the person who sets all the events in motion. Just like Jack is. Now, Jack would pretty quickly start calling himself Hojo and Icarus Zack as a sort of in-character roleplay, and the two got into conversation, becoming acquainted. A few days go by, and Icarus posts someone else's fan art. Now, don't get too open arms, Twitter artists, so was the way in the old web shrine days. He'd often post fan art of Zack and Cloud, sometimes even wrote stories to go along with them. On this one occasion, he writes, quote, something about cold water and being strangled by tentacles. Jack IMs him again. He compliments the story, and Icarus thanks him. Then he goes,
it was really realistic. Is that a memory?
What?
Is that one of your memories?
He says no, he just made it up, brushing off the strange question. A few days later, Jack sent him another message, this time saying that his wife would like to talk to him. He agrees as, of course, wives are nice people. Now, a note about Icarus. He had a bit of an alcohol problem at this point in his life, and he attributes this to a lot of his ability to rationalize some of the things that took place here, as well as contributing to forgetting some of the more minor details. But just keep that in mind. Her name is Jen, and she talks about her belief in magic. Icarus knows it's all bullshit, but he stays respectful. She insists he calls her Jenova, and emotes poking him with tentacles. He assumes she's just really into roleplay, and in a way, he's kinda right. Jen asks if he has any memories of past lives. Icarus says he doesn't, but he does believe in them. Working with this, she immediately goes into a whole spiel. She says that there are infinite universes, and fictional stories are in their own. Final Fantasy VII happened in an alternate universe, and she thinks Icarus is a reincarnation of Zack from the game. She gives all these similarities and convinces him it could be possible. She also says that she is the reincarnation of the ancient evil alien Jenova, and speaks of the other people she hangs around, who are mostly also all reincarnations of FF7 characters. There's Aeris and Cid, and his partner at the time was also assigned Red 13, and they lived with a, quote, overweight, dislikable man, who was their ghast. And while they weren't assigned a character, Icarus would also become acquainted with someone named Theo around this time, but much more on them later. Also, don't give me shit for calling her Aeris. I know it's Aerith, but we're not talking about the character. We're talking about the chick who thinks she's the character. Anyway, time goes on. The past life stuff doesn't get mentioned much. Icarus becomes better friends with Jen. They all participate in large group chats with others, and Icarus becomes so close to them that he even starts posting to his live journals about how much he thinks of them. Come Christmas time, Icarus is pretty good online friends with both Jen and Jack. Eventually they ask him to visit them in their apartment in State College, Pennsylvania for a weekend to meet everybody. Icarus lives in Brooklyn, New York, so the bus ride there would cost him about $300. They promised they'd at least pay to feed him, and so on December 21st, 2001, Icarus gets his pet rat and takes off, bringing Jen a little watercolor set as a thank you for letting me come over gift. Jack meets him at the bus stop wearing a lab coat. What a fucking dork. When the duo arrive at the apartment, Jen storms towards them enraged. She looks like she just got out of bed and is wearing a purple skirt pulled all the way up to her tits. She gets in Jack's face and screams at him, and then in a split second changes modes to be super happy and welcoming. The apartment is a complete mess. There's tons of clutter and paper and glitter all over the floor. But whatever. Icarus figures, hey, they're all college kids. College-aged kids make a mess. And so, through the weekend, Icarus is taken around town and introduced to a ton of people in the group, many of which he doesn't remember. One being Marley, whom he describes as super awesome and his surly mentor. Jen loved to go shopping. It's one of the few reasons she'd ever leave the apartment. Often the group would go out together to supermarkets or malls, and on one such mall trip, Jen really wants something, which happened quite a bit. She finds these items she calls sparklies or shinies, things she really wants for loose reasons, sometimes even stating that they have magical properties. Now whatever this item is, neither Jen, Jack, nor Icarus have the money for it, and so Jen goes off into the corner of the mall and sulks. This lasts a while, but she gets over it by the time they head home at least. Around this time is where Icarus realizes a lot of Jen's behavior is not role-playing. She truly believes that she is the reincarnation of Jenova, or at least wants others to believe that about her. She talks about having people living in her head, having children and other selves, casting magic, having astral babies, etc. She would often switch personas to fit her moods, such as acting like a small, innocent child when she wants sympathy. Icarus just humors her. During the weekend, Icarus tells Jen that he cannot eat red meat, as he was raised vegetarian and his body never got used to it. Almost every night, she'd still make steak anyway. When she didn't make steak, she'd be putting red meat in other things, like pasta. Overall, some of the things were, as the kids say, cringy, but whatever. They seem cool enough, and a lot of the stuff can be overlooked. They had a welcoming environment, especially for Icarus, a young trans man looking for acceptance. And other than some incidents, they seemed like genuinely cool people.
Exactly. I was like, oh, it's like a college town. They're my age. You know, like, even if I saw them fighting while I was there, it's probably just a one-off. It's not going to be a big deal. Yeah, obviously it was, and I was wrong on, like, every single count. Yeah, I mean, I pretty much, I was, like, when I was, like, preteen, teen, and the internet was around, it was like, don't meet anybody from the internet. They're going to kill you. Yeah. And so that was like my benchmark. If I met somebody for the first time and they weren't like, oh, here's a knife and I'm bringing it to you, I was like, all right, they're safe. That's all people on the internet want to do if they're bad.
And so, toward the end of the weekend, Icarus gets on the phone with his mother, and she gets into a fight with him, as she tends to do. Icarus hangs up and cries. Jen and Jack try their best to comfort him, until Jen instantly jumps to extreme measures, talking about how he should stay longer to get away from her, that he should abandon his family, that he should call a youth support group, and so on. Icarus is put off by this, but he does work it out with his mom that he's going to stay an extra 2 days. Jen goes on talking about her own past, that her mom was the same, hated her for being a lesbian, and that Jack had to come all the way to California to save her. She also talks about an old friend of hers that was abusive and, quote, trained her to be Sephiroth. Sephiroth, of course, being the main villain of the game, like mentioned before, was born with Jenova cells. I don't know how you train someone to be someone, especially if you consider them to be an honest-to-God reincarnation, but I ain't the big expert on this stuff like Jen is. Their promise to pay to feed Icarus went unfulfilled. His bank account at this point was drained, and his poor pet rat was also starving. It was immensely important that they got to the bus on time. Jen insists she knows what time the bus will come because she's checking it on her computer that Icarus isn't allowed on. They get to the bus, and they miss it by an hour, forcing Icarus to stay longer again, this time for just 1 extra day. Over the coming months, Icarus continues to visit the apartment, always meeting new group members. He meets Aeris, and they become good friends, bonding over RPGs and her having gone to Japan. Jen ships Zack and Aerith, so she tried to get the real Icarus and Aeris to get together, despite protests and the fact that Icarus was identifying as Ace at the time. She even threatened to put aphrodisiacs in their fucking food. Instead of hooking up, The two would just hang out and play video games together. The next day, Jen introduces Icarus to magic battles, or LARP fights. She swung around a stick, casting make-believe magic, acted hurt when Jack pretended to throw stuff at her after making wacky hand movements. Jack would act hurt after Jen casted her own magic spells, etc. They were playing Final Fantasy VII music in the background all during. Icarus sat and watched until Jen drags him onto his feet and encourages him to participate. He kept laughing. He could barely care, doing limp wrist movements, and Jen would fall to the floor panting. They'd say, "See, Zach, you can use magic." It's hard not to notice after a while that Jen had a lot of strange behaviors. When she got stressed out about something in public, she'd act faint. Icarus came to her aid, thinking that she was anemic or something. Increasingly each visit, Jen would ask Icarus for money for food, toys, or other shinies. On one occasion, Jen and Jack locked Icarus in a soundproof music practice room in a school to simulate the mansion basement from FF7 and force him to remember being Zack. This induced a panic attack. He banged on the door and jerked the handle over and over, and eventually he was finally let out. He was shaking. In spring 2002, Jack messages Icarus to inform him that the rock band Jimmy Eat World is going to have a free concert in town soon, knowing that he's into them. Icarus invites his friend Z to tag along. Jen assigns Z as Vincent Valentine due to her long hair. Z just plays along and humors all the magic-y stuff. Jen tries to perform a past life regression with them to, quote, see what Final Fantasy character they really were. She takes them to the bedroom that smells horrible, told to lie on the floor, and loops Vincent's theme from FF7. During, Jen gives a big hypnotic speech to bring out their past lives or whatever. Icarus and Z struggle to take any of this seriously. They joke and laugh together the whole time, much to Jen's dismay. All during, Z is sneezing and coughing repeatedly, with the sneezing likely due to the dust and glitter, and the cough from her chronic bronchitis. At the end they sit up and Jen asks which character they are. Z says, "I am Vincent." At this point, according to Jen, Z either became Vincent or his soul was in her body, as if it wasn't already there. Jen gets frustrated at the laughter and says they're both too silly to do this tonight, and that they'll try again another time. In response to the sneezing, Icarus joked that Z is just allergic to magic, and Jen fully takes this seriously and shakes her staff over Z, chanting gibberish to try to cure her. It doesn't work. Jen at this point was full mask off. Even though she just met Z, she'd known Icarus for a bit, and so had no problems taking advantage of him and others with their money and kindness. She was just flat out meaner to Jack in front of everybody. She'd lie constantly, and there were even stories about her taking advantage of people's past traumas to get her way. Jen would often lie to shop owners, medical supply companies, organizations she finds in the yellow pages, and whatever, just to get free stuff. She would call medical supply companies to try to get syringes for research. She lied about being a student for discounts or to make friends. She went to CVS in a lab coat claiming to be a med student for discounts. She told the Christian bookstore employee that she talks to angels to get free books and a discount, stuff like that. Jen would dye food green and have everyone drink green Gatorade to pretend it's Mako Energy, the power source from Final Fantasy VII that is also green. Unfortunately, Baja Blast wouldn't hit store shelves until 2004. At one point, Icarus sat on one of the couches and watched as Jen and Jack had a sparring sword fight. She offered to give sword lessons in the past, but when fighting, she had no sense of stance or balance, and leaves herself open quite often. Jack holds the broken wooden trainer sword over his head sideways, and Jen, with a show katana, repeatedly hits it and hacked it to pieces. It was $30 and belonged to Jack. So yeah, she was an interesting character. Icarus and Z end up going to the concert while Jen and Jack stay home. The ground was super muddy, and ended up getting all over their pants. They had a blast, though. They got super goofy and swung each other into the mud, and then on the walk home, some dudes who had been literally rolling in the mud offered them a hug, and they accepted, of course. They come back covered in mud, obviously, and Jen is furious, making them stand in the bathtub to clean themselves. Icarus remembers the whole event quite fondly. Flash forward a few months. Once again, Jack and Jen suggest Icarus live with them over the summer. Despite all the crazy stuff, Icarus could deal with it, as he did genuinely enjoy the company of his fellow nerds. He hated being in Brooklyn with his mom for months on end, and he was all for it. This time, he agreed to move in. In summer 2002, he made arrangements with his family, and carried his PC tower through the subway, and took a $100 ride to State College. When he arrives, Jen isn't home. It wasn't a problem, though, as Icarus was happy to spend more time with Jack, since they rarely had any hangout time one-on-one. Soon, Icarus' mother calls, and she gives Icarus an ultimatum. Get a job in 3 days, or come home. A tall ask, but Icarus was so determined to stay away from his mom that he busts his ass, walking around town in the heat all day to fill out applications, and by damn he did it, landing a supermarket job. It looked like life was gonna get great. He had a job, he was away from his mom, He was with his rad and computer in a happy home environment, surrounded by people that seemed to get him. They were nerdy, fun to hang out with, and accepted him for who he was. He was making all sorts of new friends at this point, meeting the aforementioned Marley and Chris. Chris is actually the guy who I said was their ghast. You know, the overweight, dislikable man. The future seemed bright, but it only took a week for Icarus's mood to sour completely. He's made to do all the manly man jobs because he's supposed to be like Zack. You know, the guy that was simply a tool for Shinra, the company he works for, and as soon as he realized that, he defected and got hunted down. Shit, maybe these people are reincarnations. He carried all the groceries to the house, made all the money, and he was always relied on to fix and move furniture. He was also the only dish cleaner. The trash was never taken out, and so the apartment always smelled like rotting flesh, a fitting odor for Genova's domain. Jen blamed the mess on a former owner who must have done something. They were always poor. Jen quit her babysitting job almost immediately after Icarus moved in, and with Jack in college full-time, this left Icarus and his part-time job as the sole income coming into the house. Jen flat out refused to get a new job after quitting. At one point, Icarus had to receive help from an online friend to pay a month's rent. Jen and Jack requested him to steal day-old bakery items and sushi from work, risking his job. Jen would often complain about the flavor of the day-olds he did bring. He also notes that he could have easily saved up to keep up with rent if he wasn't also responsible for the food shopping, and if Jen was content by eating less lavishly. But she constantly wanted $10 steaks and Gatorade as opposed to cheaper foods. Icarus would regularly only be able to afford a night of food before a paycheck was completely drained. The steaks were also difficult for Icarus due to the aforementioned red meat digestion issues. Likely due to not being able to afford it, his drinking slowed down fast, and he attributes this to a lot of his waking up around this time. He definitely got more annoyed with the Jen-isms around this point. Here's some more fun facts about Jen. She has a tendency to not leave the house. She'd offer to come to California to hang out with Icarus and Z, but never did. She'd announce going to cons and saving for them, etc., but never did. Jen apparently stole Aeris's crystals and doujinshi, and she would claim herself to be taking orders from Ultimecia, a fictional villain from Final Fantasy VIII, as an excuse for doing bad things. She would at least at one point get upset and deny being a lesbian, despite Jack identifying as a woman at the time, and her allegedly attempting to force herself on Aeris. On the topic of Jen's soul bonding, it went beyond role-playing as characters and acting like a reincarnation of a single character. She told people all sorts of things to make herself special. Cayla, another victim of hers, lists some of her claims as follows. She claims to be the queen of the fairies that live in her backyard and local park. She claims to be the incarnation of death itself, like the Grim Reaper, and is personally responsible for everyone who dies. She claims to have time magic and control the flow of time itself. This is a common Final Fantasy spell school, and is the specialty of Ultimecia, the main antagonist of FF8. She claims herself to be the Witch King and has controls of the legions of Dark Riders from Lord of the Rings. She claims to be a P12 plus telepath like in Babylon 5 and can read minds, which is why she can read people so well. She still wore that purple skirt dress and it smelled horrible, on top of not fitting it. Though it eventually ripped beyond repair during this time, she was not only the reincarnation of Jenova, but also Sephiroth, Cloud, Zack, and President Shinra from Final Fantasy VII, Ultimecia from Final Fantasy VIII, who was also her mother, Garnet and Steiner from Final Fantasy IX, a ton of characters from The Incredibles, Integra and Alucard from Hellsing, quite a bit of the cast of Babylon 5, a ton of people from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Morgan Le Fay from Arthurian Legend, who she is also a descendant of, and so many more to come. Just you wait. It was never that Jen actually believed that she was these characters, as she once admitted to Aeris. No, the fucked up thing is that she was knowingly convincing others in her group that she did, and that they were also sharing souls with fictional characters. Her followers just bought into the hype, while Jen used that fact to control people and get her way. And that kind of leads us into one of the other more concerning behaviors that became apparent from living with Jen. The way that she controlled Icarus's contact with the outside world. She was on a computer or on the phone every second of every day, using up all the bandwidth, and whenever Icarus could get online, she would hover over him and watch him as he typed so he couldn't make live journals about how bad things were. You heard that right. This person stood behind him and watched him use the internet like a hawk, and whenever he IM'd someone, she would write down the username. Then, she would go ahead and contact them on her own. This is actually how she recruited some of Icarus's friends into their group. Jen strictly kept track of everything Icarus did, such as requiring him to always tell her where he's going when he goes out. They never gave him a key to the apartment, so he'd been locked out a few times. During those times, he would bang on the door while Jen was asleep. He wasn't on the lease, and the apartment was also on the second floor, so he couldn't go in through the window or anything. Jen was also known to stay up insanely late, so it's likely that she did hear all this banging and kinda just ignored it. When Icarus's phone ran out, Jen required herself to always be present when he would use the landline, just sitting and listening. He had to keep some of his stuff secret from her, like picking up dumpster diving as a hobby. There were also 2 websites he could go on without Jen bothering him too. Furcadia, because Jen didn't like the UI, and MegaHowl, an AI chatbot that was the only thing he could freely and honestly vent to. Jen paid no mind to it because it wasn't a real person, I guess. Sleep deprivation is the common talking point for the victims that have shared their stories about Jen. She repeatedly woke Icarus up at 3 a.m. to see fairy rings or fight some magical disturbance or whatever the fuck, and as a result, he wouldn't get enough sleep for work. Work that only he was attending, to get money to buy food that only he was buying. For Jen. Jen and Jack got into fights often, screaming at each other, slapping, punching, and so on. Due to the small apartment, it was very audible, with whimpering, beating, often followed by noisy sex. It all gave Icarus flashbacks to his parents' violent divorce. He couldn't even cry in the apartment because Jen and Jack would get all in his business about it, and he'd have to make up some magical excuse for it. Sid came over from time to time, and he was a great friend to Icarus whenever he needed it. He had his moments, as many people do, though, and the second he ever left, the shit-talking began. Jen and Jack talked about Sid's dickish moments and acted like that's all he ever was, subtly trying to turn everyone on him. Then he'd come back over and the cycle repeats. This excommunication behavior, while seemingly failing to affect Sid, became another cult-like tactic of Jen's. As evident by what happened to Aeris. Aeris was like Sid. She didn't live with the group, but she was close enough with Jack and talked to the group from time to time. She's known Jen for a little while, with her even being a, quote, apprentice of Jen's. Although, as part of her Cetra training, she was made to sit in a bath full of ice cubes by Jen, for some ungodly reason. Aeris has her problems with Jen and her behaviors, but she had no qualms about the soul bondy stuff. She believes it differently, however. To her, it's more that she can channel these characters to help her through her life. Very similar to how writers say their characters live in their head. A much less literal take than we've seen. As Jen and eventually the others interpret this more, that you share a soul with another being, perhaps one from a fictional universe. Also, Aeris might actually be, and I'm not making this up, the reason soul bonding spread as a term online. But more on that stuff later. The point is, soul bonding and magic helped Aeris deal with things in her life, and she was beginning to resent Jen more and more as she realized that she just uses it as a means to control people and prop herself up. One day, Jen calls Aeris, asking her to come over that weekend, and she says she can't. Right there and then, Jen throws a fit, and eventually it escalates to, if you don't come visit me now, then we're not going to be friends anymore. It wasn't a hard choice, to say the least. Jen goes on about how she was betrayed, and that she and Aeris were so united, acting like she was the victim in this scenario. And the worst part is that she managed to turn the entire house against her, for not wanting to come over. It got insane. When I found out that this is what it was all rooted in, it made this shit so much funnier in hindsight. One night, Icarus and Jack were out stealing books at the used bookstore entirely because they were that poor, and Icarus read to keep himself sane. He's perusing around to find a Clockwork Orange. Jack comes over to show him a Team Rocket book when his cell phone goes off. It's Jen. Apparently, Aeris called Jen asking for her stuff back that she had left at the apartment. She obviously wasn't going to be hanging around there anytime soon, so she wants her stuff back. Somehow, this escalates to Jen freaking the absolute fuck out, crying and screaming, and then calling Jack to tell him that she was going to kill herself and that she had slit her wrists. Jack and Icarus hail a cab that they can't afford and show up back at the place. Sid's there, nursing Jen's wounds. Except there were no wounds.
Jen had scratched herself horizontally on the wrists. Maybe it was with a safety pin or a butter knife. It wasn't any kind of suicide attempt. At the most, it would sting.
Jen was crying about how Aeris called her the crisis that's destroying the world. How in character of her. Even for a moment, Icarus knew the cut was bullshit and that Jen was being very overly dramatic and fake, but he was still angry at Aeris because of the groupthink. He was supposed to be angry at her. How could he not be? She betrayed the group, after all. He sent her angry emails, gave her the silent treatment when she came over to get her stuff. She still wanted to be his friend, and much to his regret, Icarus never fixed that friendship. The disgusting conditions in the apartment were only getting worse. The only people who ever cleaned were guests, and it constantly smelled like rotten flesh. And there was so much trash that would not be taken out. So, what would a young troop of fresh adults do in this situation? Fucking abandon ship, I guess. Yes, for some reason, Jen determined that the only way to solve this trash issue was to just leave it to be the landlord's responsibility, and for some reason the landlord agreed to this? Apparently Jen made a deal with her to move into a smaller one-bedroom apartment that she also owned, and I guess just kinda left the mess. blaming the smell on the former owner who must have done something. On moving day, Icarus left work early to help. Allegedly, Jen and Jack were going to help as well, but due to some magical excuse, Jen bailed on them. Icarus packed everything while Jen laid on the couch, complaining. He finds a dildo in the process. Until Jack arrived, it was all up to Icarus to pack, move things out down 2 flights of stairs barefoot, and move the items into the new apartment. At one point, Chris, the group's aforementioned Gast, carried some items out to the lawn, but the bulk was Icarus's responsibility. Jack doesn't show up to help until 6 p.m., likely due to school. The move took roughly 4 hours in the blistering heat. 1 bedroom, 3 people, more people coming and going often, screaming, magic, beatings, sword fighting, and loud sex. It's all enough to make anyone lose their mind.
I started feeling desperate, trapped with Jen over my shoulder whenever I wrote, and checking my blog the next morning if she wasn't. I couldn't get anything out. I had not been drinking since I came there, but I was ready to start again. I could never talk to my friends, and when I could, I had to pretend everything was hunky-dory for when Jen talked to them. The few Forcadia people I knew were sympathetic, but there was nothing they could do to help. I couldn't go to Sid because what if he was on their side? What if he rejected me for being such an ass? I was starting to see Aeris's point, and I was getting frantic. I started to sneak out and run down to empty parking lots at night to use the payphone to call my dad, collect. He was the only one who knew what was happening, really, besides Z. Those two were briefed on the situation, and both of them were telling me it sounded. But because Jen would always be out on the prowl and find me, I could never tell them quite how bad. Just that I was stressed, I was upset, and I was sick of Jen being unable to go make money because she was pregnant with some astral baby or something.
Icarus, Jen, and Jack take a long bus ride into town to Kmart to go shopping for the new apartment. Jack suddenly seemed to have money that he didn't have before, and the group wasn't using it for food. For some reason, Jen really wanted a cabbage cloth on this shopping trip, despite never needing it for anything. It was overpriced, and Jack said a normal towel would work. This devolved into a public screaming fight. Jen said how she didn't love Jack anymore, she was leaving him, how dare he do this to her. Jack screamed back she does this every time, she doesn't need it, and so on. People started staring. Jen was unwilling to take the bus home. The group had a ton of bags to carry home, and she wouldn't carry any of them. Because it was impossible to hold all the stuff, they got another taxi they couldn't afford. During the ride, Jen and Jack continued to violently bicker. The driver tried to make small talk about Cape May to Icarus, but it was difficult to talk over them. In the new apartment, the trash problem repeated itself, because of course it did. Hygiene was not a thing that Jen cared about, as she wore that purple skirt pull-up dress number daily, and never bathed, opting instead to cover herself in scented oils and glitter. Icarus was in a pit of despair during this time. Some live journals of his from this time still remain to this day, and they are just heartbreaking.
I can remember being little, listening to the fights between Mom and Papa and coiling up in my bed, playing with toys, ignoring it. I remember Molly tried to get up from a dollhouse game once during the shouting matches, and I stopped her. I told her to pretend you don't hear it. It's easier that way, but still hurts. I still cower in a corner over it. I don't know why. I guess just because I'm the third wheel, it's easy for me to become the one that Jen isn't mad at, and therefore a target of my ridicule for Hojo. But I don't want to be. Sleep is sketchy. I wake up because I can hear them fight in the middle of the night. I hear flesh slapping flesh and tell myself they're just having nightmares and hitting the other by accident. But I know it isn't true. I know the frantic, mewling voices yelling, "You keep changing everything around," aren't from dreams. I wish they were. I really do. Because I don't know what to do to stop them. And then I have to go to work and be happy and chipper, and I can't. I'm sick inside and tired and lonely. I'm so lonely. I find myself pushing down tears almost constantly now, telling myself it won't do any good, just makes more problems. I don't want to say my problems because my friends are at the root of it. It's better for them to just think that the problem is me mad at myself, or that I'm tired. I'm not tired. I'm just sick and depressed. I wish people weren't all like this. I keep pretending they must be. I can't stay in one place. I just can't stay happy anywhere. It's what's even more depressing. I keep finding myself in places that just beat on me. I can't go home. I don't want to. I don't want to be here. I want to go home even less. I don't know what to do about money. When I make it work, I try to put in the bank, but within 24 hours, it's gone. Jen uses it to buy food. She promises to only use 25, and she uses all 40. and I have none. And I really, really wanted to go save some. I really did. I want to have money for Arthmore and for when I go back to school and have aside when there's something I need or want. I don't own deodorant. It hurts deep down in my chest, this crushing pain. I don't know what to do at all. I want to call Z. I'm thinking of using the phone at the supermarket and calling collect. Having her call it back tonight, late, if I can get away. I hope I can. I want to take my booze and wash some of this away so I won't be woken up tonight when the fight comes. I can't make anything better. It's so frustrating. It's breaking me down.
Sid came by every now and then, and he could only give Icarus sympathetic looks. His supermarket job cut his hours time and time again until he was only getting 1 hour a week. He had to feed this house on $6 a week. He just slept and read whenever he could. Anything to escape reality. And then, one day, a rainstorm knocked out the power at the supermarket, so they sent Icarus home early. He walks home with no umbrella, because of course he can't afford one, and his shoes are soaked. He leaves them outside to dry. That night, after the rain stopped, Icarus goes outside and sees Jen and Sid lying in the grass. Jen tries to talk to Icarus about God and he ignores her. She starts fake crying, Icarus yells at her, and then Sid tells him he's always there for him. The next day, the shoes were gone. Someone stole his fucking shoes. He took what he can grab, Jack's college login info, some keys, some trash food to feed his rat, and left. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. He walked barefoot in the blistering heat and slept where he could. He was homeless for 2 days, entirely because it beat living in that fucking apartment. He goes onto the college campus during this time and uses the school computers with Jack's login information. He tells everyone he could about what had happened and that Jen is driving him insane. Among these people he talked to Sid. Icarus was initially scared to talk to Sid despite his previous support. He wasn't 100% sure where Sid's allegiance lied, and knew if he messaged the wrong person, they could easily manipulate him back into that house. As he's sending the IM, he's shaking. Thankfully though, Sid was an absolute bro. He picks Icarus up, buys him a beer, and just chats with him to help get his mind off everything. Sid also provided him a place to stay, letting him sleep on his apartment floor, which at least beat the park benches. He also let Icarus borrow his cell phone, which he used to call his dad. He explained the whole situation, and his dad was completely there for him, buying a plane ticket to Alabama, where he was. Icarus had an out, but first he had to get his stuff back. Sid escorted him through the old apartment, where they walked past Jen as she gave him scowling looks of betrayal. It didn't matter, though. She had no more control over him. She was just a sad and angry woman child sitting in the corner giving dirty looks. All that mattered is that he was out. He escaped, and now he can call whoever he wanted, and message who he wanted, and say what he wanted. Icarus was finally free at the Final Fantasy VII house. And of course, we all know what happens next. 3 years later, when his life gets a lot more stable, Icarus is reminded of it and shares his story on LiveJournal. Almost immediately, he starts getting comment after comment of various people saying that they might have also had contact with these people. And yeah, anyone can say anything on the internet, but a lot of these people were his friends and people in the fandom, or otherwise people with verifiable evidence, such as saying full names that weren't in the original LiveJournal entry. Things only ramped up with the launch of the dedicated site. Icarus couldn't stop getting emails. It seemed like this wasn't a single isolated occurrence. It appeared that Jen and Jack both had long histories, the exact extent of which is still a mystery to this day. Hey, thank you for watching. This is just part 1. I plan on doing many more videos in this series. Thank you for sticking around for this remake Rebirth project. I'm sorry, hold on. There's like hair on my fucking mic. What the fuck, Mercy? You've got hair on my mic, dude. This sucks, dude. Don't have cats. Anyway, thank you for watching very much. I put a lot of work into it. And I wanna give a big shout out to my partner Beck, my buddy Matt from the TheMemorySlot, and Cayla from the Human Exception Podcast for all helping proofread this script. Thank you to my boy Eddie for doing some voices, and also Matt from the TheMemorySlot did some voices, and yeah. Here's the credits now. This video is just a piece of the puzzle. This video is going to be intended to be part of a larger thing, so Stay tuned for the larger thing. Thank you.